The air in the beacon tower elevator hung heavy, thick with the hum of strained cables and the faint metallic tang of a machine on the verge of surrender. Nathan Cole's voice cut through it, steady as a blacksmith's hammer, yet laced with a taut edge, like a wire stretched to sing. "Do you always glare at the man trying to save your life?" His words landed softly but pierced, his eyes catching the flicker of the overhead light as it bathed his weathered face in stripes of shadow and gold. Across the cramped cabin, Elise Harper's jaw tightened, her arms folded not just against the chill seeping through the shaft, but against the vulnerability of being trapped. Her lips parted, cool as frost. "I didn't ask for your help." Her gaze darted to the control panel, its buttons dim and defiant, then to the sealed doors, mocking her with their silence. "And I don't glare. I assess." Nathan's mouth quirked, a half-smile that knew better than to linger. "Assess this, then. We're caught between the 15th and 16th floors, the motor's whimpering like a stray in a blizzard, and the backup system's got about 30 seconds before it quits." He crouched beside the panel, his toolbox yawning open like a faithful friend, tools gleaming under the faltering light. The elevator shuddered, a lazy pendulum swinging the bulb above, casting wild shadows. A groan echoed from deep within the walls, gears clashing, metal crying, a sound that felt alive with warning. Elise's eyes flicked to the sliver of a gap at the door's edge, where darkness waited, whispering of the city far below. She hated confined spaces, hated the loss of control even more. Her voice softened, almost a surrender. "Do what you need to." Nathan didn't hesitate. With a sharp pop, he pried the panel free, exposing a tangle of wires like the veins of a tired beast. His hands, broad, calloused, steady as stone, moved with a quiet certainty, the kind earned from years of coaxing broken things back to life. Elise watched, curiosity tugging at her despite herself. His navy uniform shirt, faded from countless washes, clung softly to his shoulders, the collar frayed like a memory worn thin. A name patch, Nathan, was stitched in white thread, slightly askew, as if sewn by a hand that cared more than a machine ever could. "You've done this before," she said, her words hovering between question and statement. His eyes stayed on the wires, his tone flat but warm, like a fire banked low. "Yeah, used to make a living at it. Then life decided I should mop floors instead." The elevator lurched violently, a sudden jolt that flung Elise against the wall. Nathan's arm shot out, catching her shoulder before she could fall, his grip a fleeting anchor. For a heartbeat they were close, close enough for her to catch the faint scent of machine oil and winter air clinging to him, a reminder of the world outside this steel cage. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, searching. She straightened, brushing his hand away with a quickness that betrayed her. "Perfectly fine," but her fingers curled into her palms, hiding the tremor she refused to let him see. Nathan's laugh was short, dry, a sound that saw through her armor. "You've got a strange definition of fine." The emergency light flickered, weaker now, threatening to plunge them into shadow. Nathan reached into his toolbox, pulling out a flashlight, its beam slicing through the dimness like a promise. He leaned into the panel, muttering softly to the wires as if they might answer back. Elise stood rigid, the hum of cables and the creak of metal above gnawing at her composure, each sound a reminder of how little she controlled. "How long?" she asked, the question slipping out like a held breath. He glanced over his shoulder, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. "If you keep distracting me, an hour. If you let me focus, maybe 5 minutes." The retort was sharp but landed gently, stirring something in her, a faint tug at her lips, the ghost of a smile she hadn't felt in months. She smoothed it away, but not before the sound of metal snapping back into place broke the charged silence. Nathan flipped a switch and the elevator lurched, not up, not down, but just enough for the doors to sigh open, reluctant as a confession. He pried them wider, peering into the shaft. "We're halfway between floors. I can get the door open enough for you to climb through. Step carefully over the gap." Elise's brows lifted, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "You expect me to crawl out like someone who wants to get out of a stuck elevator?" He cut in, his tone dry as winter air. Or you can stay here and hope the power holds. Your call." She hesitated just a beat, then stepped forward. Nathan braced himself, one boot wedged against the wall, one hand gripping hers with a steadiness that startled her. Warm, unshakable, even as the elevator groaned beneath them. She swung herself up, her heels catching briefly on the edge, and landed on the upper floor's landing. She turned back, breathless. "Aren't you coming?" "After you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Just making sure this thing doesn't slam shut." He climbed out in one fluid motion, landing beside her, his toolbox clattering softly. For a moment they stood in the quiet hallway, the world beyond the elevator strangely still, as if holding its breath. Elise's gaze lingered on him, the grease smudge along his jaw, the slow, measured pull of his breath, the broad shoulders beneath the worn navy fabric. "Thank you," she said, the words reluctant, as if they had to fight past a wall of pride. Nathan gave a faint nod, already gathering his tools. "You're welcome." She turned to leave, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor, each step a reclaiming of control. But halfway down the hall she glanced back, catching him bent over his toolbox, his head bowed in quiet focus. Something tightened in her chest, an odd, fleeting thought she dismissed as quickly as it came. She walked away, but Nathan, hearing the faint pause in her steps, let himself wonder if the elevator wasn't the only thing in this building caught between floors. The operations office smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy, its walls lined with clipboards that judged more than they recorded. Mr. Carver stood before one, his tie a garish red streak against the gray Chicago morning, his smile sharp but hollow, never touching his eyes. "Next time you play hero, Mr. Cole," he said, tapping a capped pen against the clipboard like a gavel, "remember your job title." Nathan didn't flinch, his voice steady as poured concrete. There wasn't time to wait for the contracted tech. The brake relay was popping. We were 30 seconds from a stall. "You bypassed protocol," Carver snapped, his tone clipped, authoritative. "You're a janitor. You mop floors. You don't override safeties in elevators with the CEO inside." Through the glass wall at the far end of the room, winter light spilled across the scuffed linoleum, cold and thin. Beyond it, Elise Harper passed, her heels a quiet rhythm, flanked by two board members in suits that spoke of power. Her eyes flicked toward the office for a single second, a glance so brief it might have been a trick of the light, but something flickered in her expression. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition, before folding back into the neutral mask she wore like armor. She kept walking. "Noted," Nathan said, his voice even, a shield of its own. He didn't say that neutral was safer for both of them, that the building had its own weather system, and rumor was its wind. "Is that all?" Carver sighed, a soft sound laced with disappointment, as if Nathan's calm had robbed him of a victory. "You'll take the graveyard trash run, floors 20 through 26, for the next 3 nights. Consider it a reminder." "Understood." Nathan turned to leave, but Carver's voice followed, almost kind, a knife wrapped in velvet. "You save yourself by staying small." Nathan paused, his hand tightening on the strap of his toolbox. "You save people by staying steady," he said, and walked out before Carver could reply. By late afternoon, Chicago had tipped into a bruised blue, the sidewalks dusted with salt like forgotten chalk. Nathan climbed 2 flights to his narrow apartment, the air inside heavy with the faint warmth of coffee and laundry soap. The lock resisted, sticking at the first turn, then gave, a small mercy, like so much in his life. Before he could shrug off his coat, a voice burst through the quiet, bright as a window flung open. "Dad!" Lila called, bounding from her bedroom, one sock missing, her golden hair a wild tangle. "Did you know elevators can sing?" He grinned, the weight of the day lifting just enough. "What am I listening for, champ?" She held up her sketchbook, not to show a drawing, but to press it to her ear like a seashell. "The silence after it stops," she said, solemn as a poet. Then she flipped the book around, revealing a pencil sketch of an elevator cabin, its light glowing like a lantern in a storm. 2 figures stood inside, a tall man with a toolbox, his hands sparking with quiet purpose, and a woman with a straight spine and eyes Nathan recognized even in graphite. Eyes like ice, Lila had said, until they melted. "Is that me?" he asked, his voice softer now, a thread of wonder woven through it. "Obviously." Lila tilted her head, her smile mischievous. "And that's the lady whose eyes look like they've seen too many winters, but might thaw if you're patient. Did you save her?" "I got the door open." He kept the rest, the fear, the focus, the unspoken thanks, tucked away where his pride slept. "Good drawing, Lila. You caught the reflection on the panel." Her face lit up, as if his praise were the safest currency in the world. "I tried cross-hatching for the shadows. Mr. Sullivan at school says light needs dark to make sense." "Mr. Sullivan's a wise man," Nathan said, setting his toolbox down with a soft thud. His eyes drifted to the kitchen counter, where a splay of mail waited, his name typed neatly on envelopes that felt colder than they should. Among them, one from the court sat like a gray stone, heavy with judgment. Lila dusted eraser crumbs onto the rug, then pinched them up with a guilty giggle. "Oops? No call from Mom?" he asked, keeping his tone light. She shook her head. "Nope, but we've got grilled cheese power tonight and tomato soup that tastes better if you stir it with that Michigan-shaped spoon." "You always say that," he teased, setting the pan to heat, wiping the counter, washing his hands, each motion a quiet prayer that needed no words. "It's a scientific fact." When Lila ducked into her room for colored pencils, Nathan slid the court envelope open with a doctor's comb he kept for paperwork, slicing the seam like a bandage he didn't want to linger on. The words were cold, clinical, temporary order continued. Supervised visitation remains in effect. Review set for March 8th. Lines about employment stability, environment, routine. None of it cruel, all of it cutting. He folded the paper and tucked it beneath a flyer for a community coat drive, as if hiding it could soften its weight. "Dad?" Lila's voice came from the doorway, sharp with concern. "You spaced." "Just thinking about soup," he said, turning to the stove, letting the sizzle of butter and bread speak for him. She squinted, unconvinced, her 10-year-old gaze piercing through adult defenses. "You're a terrible liar." "Yes," he admitted, flipping the sandwich, the golden crust a small victory. "I am." They ate at the small table by the window, snow feathering past the street lamp outside, the radiator ticking like a metronome that forgave their silences. Lila's eyes stayed on her sandwich, then flicked up, sudden and serious. "Can I send a letter to the judge?" Nathan's throat tightened, a knot of pride and fear. "Not a mean one," she added quickly, her voice small but fierce. "Words that explain the parts adults don't see." He stared at his daughter, this girl who chose hope over safety, and forced himself to breathe. "The judge has rules about letters in cases like ours," he said carefully. "But tell you what, write what you want. We'll put it in an envelope. If Miss Navarro says it's okay at the next meeting, we'll mail it. Deal?" Lila nodded, then leaned across the table, her fingers tapping his chest where old hurt slept. "You know what I like most about you?" "What's that?" "You fix things without making the broken parts feel ashamed." He swallowed, the words sinking deep, a gift he hadn't earned but would carry forever. "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." "Then keep it," she said, her smile a spark in the dimness. After dishes, Lila returned to her sketchbook, adding a tiny detail. A girl's hand pressed to the elevator glass, small and brave. Nathan tucked the court envelope deeper into the drawer, hiding the demands for proof of income, a support system, a life that didn't waver. He didn't tell her about the night shift he'd applied for at the warehouse, or the distance he kept from her mother, not just because the court demanded it, but because love sometimes meant not giving someone a reason to run. Instead, at bedtime, he traced constellations on the ceiling with a flashlight's weak glow. "There," he said, outlining a rectangle of 4 faint points. "The elevator." Lila giggled, her voice sleepy but bright. "Dad, that's just a box." "Everything important starts as a box," he said, his voice a quiet vow. "Then you decide what you carry out of it. Across town, In a therapist's office where warm light softened the edges of grief-worn furniture, Elise sat on a low couch, her coat folded beside her like a shield she hadn't yet feng xia. Dr. Nora Fielding waited, her posture calm, unstartled, as if the room itself were built to hold confessions. In the quiet sanctuary of Dr. Nora Fielding's office, where warm light softened the edges of furniture worn by others' grief, Elise Harper sat on a low couch, her coat folded with surgical precision beside her, black leather gloves aligned like sentinels guarding her composure. Dr. Fielding leaned forward, her posture a steady promise that no confession could unsettle her. "How are you sleeping?" she asked, her voice gentle but piercing. "Like a cat at a window," Elise replied, her tone clipped, as if admitting weakness might crack the glass of her control. "Alert, tense, pretending to rest." Fielding's lips quirked, a knowing half-smile. "You had a day." Elise aimed for dismissal but stumbled into confession. A stuck elevator, a man with steady hands and the audacity to act when others would have waited. Her fingers adjusted a cuff, as if refinement could smooth the raw edge of truth. "The janitor," Fielding said, not unkindly, her words a soft invitation to honesty. "The janitor," Elise echoed, her gaze drifting to a framed photograph on the bookshelf, a shoreline at dawn, pale light rising like a fragile hope. He knew exactly how long we had before it went dark, and that mattered. It mattered that someone knew. Fielding let the word hang, a quiet space for truth to settle. "You told me last year after your loss, you built a life where nothing could surprise you." "It's efficient," Elise said, then softer, as if the words had slipped through a crack in her armor. "It's lonely. I won." They lingered there, in the tender territory of honesty, unraveling the weight of 5 winters past. A blizzard that had cleaved time into before and after, when Elise had learned to hold the world at arm's length, rationing affection like medicine, measuring meetings and parties with a stopwatch. Fielding's voice was a gentle prod. "Say the child's name." Elise closed her eyes, the syllables rising like a door swinging open into air that still held her daughter's shape. "Clara." The name was a wound and a prayer, spoken with the reverence of a mother who hadn't forgotten how to grieve. "Where is Clara in the tower you run?" Fielding asked. Elise's eyes lifted, sharp with unshed tears. "In the space I never visit," her voice cracked, just once. "The 17th floor. They closed it after the accident years ago. We call it a deferred renovation." Her smile was brittle, without warmth. "A polite lie." Fielding leaned forward. "If you stood on that floor and listened, what would you hear?" Elise's hands stilled in her lap, a surrender to the question. The building breathing, a man's voice saying, "I can get you out." I'd hate him for offering, and I'd take his hand anyway. "That sounds like wanting," Fielding said, her words soft but unyielding. Elise's laugh was fragile, a glass ornament dropped on a quiet floor. "Wanting is an elevator. It moves you without asking if you're ready." Snow tapped the window, polite as a child's knock. Silence held them for a moment, a shared breath. Fielding spoke carefully. "What's one choice this week that bends you toward life?" Elise considered, her fingers grazing her gloves. "I could call operations, verify the incident report, make sure he isn't penalized for acting when protocol froze." She paused, then shook her head, the motion sharp. "No, that invites whispers of favoritism. It does more harm than good." "Another choice?" Fielding prompted. Elise's gaze settled on the gloves, immaculate as her control. "I can go to floor 17, she said, her voice steady with a courage that surprised her. "Stand in the dust and listen. Stop pretending the past is locked behind a door." Fielding's smile was warm, approving. "That's not small." "No," Elise said, rising, her posture reclaiming its strength. "But small hasn't taken me anywhere worth going." At the threshold, she paused, her gloves half on, her eyes meeting Fielding's. "He said something in the elevator. It annoyed me. It won't leave me." She exhaled. He said, "You save people by staying steady." Fielding's nod was slow, respectful. "And what do you say?" Elise slipped on her gloves, her voice a quiet vow. Steady is the courage to be seen when you can't control the ending. She stepped into the hallway, where the world smelled of winter and polished floors. A child's laughter echoed from a distant office. A bright, uninvited bell. Elise didn't turn toward it. She moved forward, her heels soft on the carpet, each step in agreement with a truth she was learning to honor. Outside, the city's breath rose in faint clouds. She lifted her face to the snow and let it kiss her skin, a fleeting absolution. Back in the narrow apartment, where the air held the faint warmth of coffee and laundry soap, Lila had fallen asleep mid-sketch, her pencil resting against the page like a sentinel guarding her dreams. Nathan eased it from her fingers, his touch gentle as a whisper, and studied her work. Along the right margin, tiny vertical lines, tally marks scratched by a child's hand, counting something only she understood. He brushed a strand of gold from her forehead, his voice barely audible. "We're getting there, champ. One mark at a time." The radiator ticked, a forgiving metronome, while the court envelope waited in the drawer, heavy but without malice. Outside, a snowplow carved through the night, its blade a quiet promise against the city's white shroud. The work order was thin as a whisper, cold as the steel it described. Re-inspect and recommission level 17 service lines. Fire sensors, elevator interface, lighting array. Beneath, a scrawl in red ink warned, "Restricted access, unsigned, offering no comfort." Nathan swiped his badge at the steel door, unopened for years. The reader hesitated, then chirped, the lock releasing with a weary groan, like a throat clearing before a confession. Dust sighed from the frame as he stepped into a hallway frozen in time. Drop cloths draped over forgotten furniture, a fern petrified in a cracked pot, a poster for a charity gala 2 winters old, its smile unaware of its own cancellation. The fluorescents flickered to life one by one, like reluctant truths. Nathan inhaled, tasting paint, paper, metal, and the faint sweetness of carpet undisturbed by footsteps. He set his toolbox down and knelt by the junction panel, unscrewing the faceplate with the care of a man coaxing a sleeping dog to wake. "Hello," a voice called, soft as a hymn. Mr. Ellis appeared in the stairwell, cap in hand, gray hair combed with the dignity of another era. He seemed smaller here, as if the years pressed harder on this floor. "You got the order?" Nathan nodded. "I did. You." "It found me on my cart," Ellis said, stepping into the corridor, his eyes tracing the walls like a curator reading a lost painting. "Like a note slipped into a hymn book. I haven't been up here since—" He trailed off, patting the wall near the elevator lobby with a gentle hand, as if comforting a friend. "You hear buildings breathe, Mr. Cole." "All the time," Nathan said, tightening a wire nut. "On 17, it's a prayer. The quiet kind a mother says to keep her child from fear." They stood in that truth for a moment, the silence heavy with memory. "Why'd they close it?" Nathan asked, though he knew companies didn't shutter floors for aesthetics. He wanted the weight of the answer. "An incident," Ellis said, his eyes on the elevator doors. "No one speaks of it because silence feels like respect. But silence is just a blanket. It doesn't warm the cold." He nodded toward the panel. "Go carefully. Everything here remembers." "I always do," Nathan said. He checked the emergency feed, voltage low, battery spent, and made a note to replace it. Prying open the elevator interface housing, he heard a relay click, a cable murmuring in the shaft like a whispered secret. Ellis's voice came again, soft, not unkind. "Ever want a different life?" Nathan's laugh was a soft exhale. "Sure. Then I learned to want this one better." "That's a sentence a man can live inside," Ellis said, easing back toward the stairwell. "I'll be downstairs if the ghosts need a pen." Nathan worked, hours thinning like winter light. He replaced brittle wires, coaxed a reluctant fire sensor into obedience, cleared a clogged condensation drain with a pipe cleaner, and a patience that could shame a saint. He labeled the unlabeled, "Do not bypass" on a reset button. Check here, first near a temperamental sensor. Small acts of care for a future kinder than the past. By late afternoon, the lights steadied, no longer flickering apologies. He stood at the elevator lobby, palms braced against the cool seam of the doors. All right, he said to the machine, his voice low, intimate. Tell me what you need. Sometimes they answered, in the slip of air, the plea of a brake. He pressed the call button. The indicator glowed. The car, on 19, hummed to life and began its descent. When the doors parted, Elise Harper stood inside, winter light etching a silver line along her cheekbone. For a heartbeat, neither moved, the memory of their last shared elevator tightening the air. She blinked, composed but startled, her question clean and unadorned. Where did you learn to fix elevators? Nathan stepped in, holding the door with his shoulder. In a plant on the South Branch. Steel, motors, men who knew the names of things. Later, union halls. Later still, anywhere someone let me touch a problem. He glanced at the panel. You? She hesitated as if weighing whether to open a window to her past. Interior architecture, she said at last. In my head, at least. Materials that forgive touch. Light that keeps its promises. She stepped into the hall, her arms uncrossing, as if the air here demanded openness. Then my father died, and the board needed a Harper who could read a balance sheet. I chose the numbers. The light didn't forgive me. Nathan's smile was faint, knowing. Light's stubborn. So are people. She paced a few steps, reading the corridor without touching it, her eyes tracing the dust like a map of loss. This floor never learned to heal, she said. They closed it and called it prudent. But prudent isn't kind. Kind needs a breaker panel, Nathan said. Prudent keeps people breathing until kind catches up. Her gaze flicked to him, sharp with recognition. You talk like a man who doesn't waste words. I used to, he said, his voice softening. Then I had a daughter who paints and a judge who counts. Now I choose words for the right ears. She nodded, absorbing his truth, then gestured to the open interface box. You could have passed this to a contractor. Could have, he agreed. But the building gave me a job. It's rude to ignore what's in your hands. Do you always answer like a parable? She asked, a hint of a smile breaking through. Only when the truth has too many teeth. They paused at the elevator threshold, the silence between them not empty but shaped, like a bowl waiting to hold something fragile. Elise's voice lowered, steel and confession entwined. I went to the therapist. We talked about floor 17, and I'm here. That's more than most do with advice, Nathan said, his tone steady but warm, refusing to make it easy for her. She looked at him, her eyes daring him to simplify her choice. If you were redesigning this lobby, where would you start? What people feel before they see? He glanced around, seeing not just the space, but its pulse. Trim the fluorescence, warm the air 3 degrees, kill the echo, add wood where hands can rest, a bench that doesn't punish the weary, a real evacuation map. He nodded toward the doors, and give the elevator a sound that isn't fear, a chime that tells the body it won't be trapped. She tilted her head, repeating his words as if testing their weight. A chime that tells the body it won't be trapped. Her voice softened, searching for splinters. I miss thinking like that. You still do, he said, his gaze steady. I schedule feelings between 4:30 and 4:50, Mr. Cole, she said, a wry edge to her voice. It's not the same. He almost laughed. Schedule 1 reckless minute. See what it buys. Her phone buzzed, a sharp tremor against her palm. She glanced at the screen, and the air cooled, her posture stiffening. Board chair, she said, an apology in the words. She answered, her voice seamless, corporate. I'm on 17. Silence stretched on the other end. Her jaw tightened. I hear you. No, I won't attend tonight's donor preview. Yes, I understand optics. I also understand maintenance schedules. Her eyes met Nathan's for a fleeting moment, a spark of defiance. Yes, goodbye. She ended the call and stood still, as if the room had rearranged itself around her. They think my time on closed floors is a liability. Closed floors show you what the building hides, Nathan said. That knowledge never hurts the right people. She glanced at the tag he'd taped to the panel. Check here first. You label things, Runa, she observed. That's generous. Labels save time, he said, and sometimes grief. The elevator chimed, its standard note jagged, clinical. Elise winced. Nathan cocked his head. Hear that jitter at the end? A tired relay. She listened, her brow furrowing. It sounds like someone swallowing a word they need to say. Then we should let it speak, he said, and her lips curved, a smile slipping through despite herself. Mr. Cole, Nathan, she amended, testing his name like a new key. If I asked you to submit an assessment for 17, design, mechanical, what would you say? I'd say give me 48 hours and the freedom to tell the truth. Truth is expensive. So are the mistakes you make to avoid it. For a moment, the hall seemed brighter, though the bulbs hadn't changed. Elise took a breath, as if remembering how. 48 hours, she said. Send it to my office, not operations, to me. He nodded, the agreement solid as a peg driven into sure wood. You'll get it. She stepped back into the elevator, but he didn't follow. The doors hesitated, as if sensing the weight of unspoken words, then began to close. Nathan, she said suddenly, catching them with her palm. One more question. He waited, his eyes steady. When you're trapped, she asked, her voice raw, unguarded, what do you tell yourself so you don't become the room you're stuck in? He met her gaze, his words a quiet oath. I say this. I came in breathing, and I'll leave breathing. Until the door opens, I'll be useful. The doors closed. The car descended. Nathan stood alone in the lobby of a floor that had chosen to remember. He tightened the final screw on the interface, then scrawled 2 words on the back of the work order before tucking it away. Be steady. Down the hall, a fluorescent flickered out, and he smiled as if the building had shared a private joke. Nathan Cole's smile flickered, a quiet acknowledgement of the building's whispered jest, as if Beacon Tower itself had shared a secret only they understood. He flicked on his flashlight, its beam slicing through the dimness of the 17th floor, guiding him toward the stairwell. As his hand reached for the handle, his phone buzzed, a soft hum, like a pulse from the city itself. A text from an unknown number glowed on the screen. Send the assessment to me. E.H. He saved the contact without fanfare, closed the steel door with a gentleness that honored its silence, and let the echo of his footsteps answer the old carpet's unspoken question. Will anyone come back? Yes, he thought, with tools, with names for things, with a chime that promises safety over fear. In the janitor's break room, an envelope waited on the workbench, heavy with intent, nestled between a coil of extension cord and a half-empty box of nails. His name wasn't typed, but scrawled in a looping hand, deliberate and warm, defying the cold precision of block letters. Inside, a cream card gleamed under the flickering fluorescent light. Beacon Tower Annual Winter Gala. Date, time, venue. At the bottom, 2 words stood out, simple yet weighty. Admit to. Nathan looked up to find Mr. Ellis leaning in the doorway, cap in hand, his eyes sparkling with mischief beneath gray brows. Must have been a mix-up, Nathan said, his voice testing the air. Ellis's smile was thin but bright, a lantern in the gloom. Mix-ups don't spell your name right. I might have slipped it into the stack before they sealed the envelopes. Nathan frowned, the card heavy in his hand. You know I don't belong at those things. You fixed her elevator, Ellis said simply, his voice steady as a keystone. Sometimes a man needs to be seen where they don't expect him. Nathan shook his head but tucked the invitation into his jacket pocket, like a man hiding a tool that might cut too deep. That night in their small apartment, Lila sat cross-legged on the floor, her colored pencils breathing life into a snow-draped street. Nathan set the invitation on the coffee table, its cream edge catching the lamplight. What's that? She asked, leaning forward, her eyes wide with curiosity. Some fancy party, he said, his tone light but guarded. Beacon Tower's Winter Gala. Probably a tux and tie affair. Not for us. She studied the card, lips pursed in thought. It says, admit to. Her gaze sparkled, a challenge wrapped in a child's hope. We could go. I could wear the blue dress Aunt Lila got me for Christmas. The one with the sparkly belt. He chuckled, the sound softening the edges of his day. Kid, you don't want to spend your night hearing folks drone about market forecasts over shrimp cocktails. Maybe not, she said, tilting her head, her voice soft but piercing. But I'd like to see you in a suit just once, to prove you own more than work shirts. Her words landed like a pebble in still water, rippling through his defenses. "You're scared," she added, quieter now. "Scared they'll see you and not know what to do with you." He sighed, her truth heavier than it should have been. "It's not my world, Lila." "Maybe not," she said, returning to her drawing, her pencil tracing snowflakes with care. "But you still belong in it, even for one night." The night of the gala, Chicago's streets shimmered, snow catching the glow of street lamps like scattered stars. Nathan stood before the mirror, tugging at the collar of his one good suit, a dark navy relic that had hung untouched in his closet for years. His work boots were traded for black dress shoes, stiff and unfamiliar, like borrowed skin. Lila emerged from her room, radiant in her blue dress, her hair falling in soft waves, cheeks flushed with excitement. She held out a silver scarf. "For you," she said, grinning. "To match me." He laughed, shaking his head. "I'm not wearing a scarf. It's a pocket square," she corrected, tucking it into his jacket before he could protest, her small hands precise with pride. Beacon Tower's ballroom was a cathedral of glass and chandeliers, its light fracturing into 1,000 captured stars. Waiters in white gloves wove through clusters of guests, champagne flutes glinting like promises. Heads turned as Nathan and Lila entered, not with disdain, but with the quiet curiosity reserved for something that doesn't fit the frame you've stared at too long. Elise Harper stood near the room's heart, speaking with donors, her emerald silk gown catching every light like a beacon. Her gaze sharpened when she saw Nathan, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Not shock, but the kind that redraws a map you thought you knew. She excused herself, her steps unhurried but deliberate, like a compass finding true north. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice warm but measured, then glanced at Lila. "And this must be your daughter." Lila smiled, shy but bold. "I'm Lila. You're the elevator lady." Nathan stifled a cough, heat rising in his cheeks. Elise's lips curved, the faintest smile breaking through her armor. "I suppose I am. And you must be the artist your father mentioned." Lila's brow furrowed, unsure. Elise's voice softened, unguarded. "He speaks of you in ways that make the world feel kinder." Something flickered in Lila's eyes, a spark of trust. She reached into her small purse and pulled out a folded piece of thick paper. "I made this." Elise unfolded it, revealing a sketch, her own likeness, captured mid-laugh, though Nathan couldn't recall ever seeing her so free. The lines were sure, the shading delicate, a child's vision of a woman unburdened by sorrow. "This is remarkable," Elise said quietly, her voice catching. "You drew this from memory?" "I drew what I thought you'd look like if you weren't so serious all the time," Layla said, her honesty bold but kind. Nathan's breath caught, but Elise didn't flinch. Her gaze lingered on the sketch, a moment longer than necessary, before she folded it carefully and slipped it into her clutch. "I'll keep this," she said. "Thank you, Lila." Later, as a string quartet wove a warm, slow melody, Elise found Nathan on the balcony, where snow fell like a quiet confession over the city. "You clean up well," she said, stepping beside him, her voice a blend of teasing and truth. He glanced at her, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "So do you, but I think you already knew that." Her lips curved, but her tone stayed steady. "Your daughter is extraordinary. You should be proud." "I am," he said simply, his voice a quiet anchor. She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the city lights, their glow softened by the snow. "When I was a child, my father brought me to this tower after hours. We'd ride the elevator to the top just to look out. He said the city looks different from above. It makes problems feel smaller." Nathan leaned on the railing, the cold biting his palms. "Sometimes it does. Sometimes it just shows you how far you can fall." She studied him, her eyes searching. "You always see both sides?" "Only if I want the truth," he said. "Truth's never just one thing." Her gaze softened, the gala's noise fading like a distant tide. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said. He shrugged, his honesty plain. "Wasn't sure it was a good idea." "Neither was I," she admitted, her voice softer now, unguarded. But sometimes the wrong rooms need the right people in them. As the evening wound down, Nathan helped Lila into her jacket at the coat check. She whispered, her voice bright with triumph. She smiled more tonight. I think the serious part's shrinking. He ruffled her hair, a grin breaking through. Maybe, or maybe you gave her something she didn't know she needed. Lila's smile was radiant. That's what artists do. They stepped into the snowy night, the city glittering like a promise half kept. Nathan glanced back through the tall glass doors. Elise was still there, speaking to a guest, but her eyes found his for a fleeting second. Not a smile, but something warmer, like the start of one. For reasons he couldn't name, he walked away feeling taller, as if the snow itself had lifted him. On Thursday evening, Nathan finished his shift, flurries dusting his shoulders as he reached the Beacon Tower lobby. He was turning toward the service exit when a voice stopped him, clear and deliberate. Mr. Cole, do you drink coffee at indecent hours? He turned. Elise stood near the revolving doors, her dark wool coat a shield against the winter, her hair gathered at the nape, her eyes carrying a weight her light tone belied. I've been known to, he said, matching her tone. How indecent. Hot, strong, with truth in it. She gestured toward a side corridor. There's a corner place that still believes in ceramic cups. Walk with me. The outside air bit like polished glass, sharp and clean. The cafe was a narrow haven, its windows fogged, a radio crooning songs that thought it was still the 1980s. They slid into a booth, steam rising from their mugs like a prayer seeking an answer. Elise wrapped her hands around her cup, as if warmth could coax her heart to speak without bruising. I owe you something, she said. You don't, Nathan replied, his voice steady, deflecting debt. Then call it an exchange, she said, her eyes meeting his unflinching. You gave me floor 17 in sentences I could breathe. I owe you a version of myself that isn't a quarterly report. He leaned forward, his voice gentle, an invitation to trust. What happened to you? Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. The world decided stillness was strength. 5 winters ago, a blizzard shut down half the city. I was 34 weeks along. Her voice faltered, the words an empty cradle. We left too late. The hospital was an hour away. We lost her. Nathan didn't move, his silence a space for her grief to rest. She continued, her voice steady but fierce, like a fire that refused to die. I turned my life into a spreadsheet. If I controlled every input, I thought I could outnumber sorrow. I made rules for breathing, took promotions like medicine. Nothing touched me because I wouldn't let it. But the elevator, she paused, her eyes distant. It wouldn't be bullied. It reminded me fear isn't a flaw. It's a fire drill. He nodded, understanding more than he said. So you came back to the room looking for the spark. I came back because I couldn't let the floor that holds my daughter's shadow become a rumor in my own building. She stared at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never said those words aloud. Thank you, he said, his voice a quiet vow, for trusting me with the part that hurts. She blinked, startled. Your turn. What did the court tell you, in language that sounds polite but feels like cold steel? Temporary order. Supervised visits. Review pending, he said, his words clipped but heavy. They want proof my life won't tilt if a paycheck falters. They're not wrong. Stability keeps kids from thinking the world's a trick. And your job? 2 jobs, he said. The tower and a warehouse night shift. I hate less than empty cupboards. I shave sleep instead of corners. It's not heroic. It's arithmetic. That sounds like love, she said, her voice soft but certain. It sounds like rent, he replied, a tired smile tugging at his lips. Lila pretends not to count the days. She scratches marks in her sketchbook. 10 marks mean I owe her pancakes. Elise's lips curved, a ledger that understood what mattered. The waitress set down a plate of late-night pie, her voice warm. On the house, you two look like you're telling each other the true things? Elise laughed, an unpracticed sound that caught her by surprise, like a bird taking flight after years in a cage. She touched a napkin to her eye, as if laughter might smudge her composure. I was wrong about you, she said. How so? I thought you fixed machines because people let you down, But you fix them because you believe people deserve a world that doesn't fail them at random. He looked out the window where snow danced in the streetlight's glow, each flake a small astonishment. My daughter deserves a door that opens when she presses the button. So does every stranger who steps into a box trusting it'll rise. And you? She asked, her voice softer now. What do you deserve? The chance to be believed when I say I'm trying. She leaned forward, her words cautious but clean. Let me help. With what? His voice didn't scoff, but it guarded a wound against too much light. The review hearing, she said. I know people who can make your employment look the way the court needs. Our counsel can advise on documenting your routine, showing the judge the home you already keep. I'm not a charity, Ms. Harper. I'm not offering charity, she said, her voice steel warmed by grace. I'm offering a correction. Systems fail in predictable ways. Sometimes the right thing is to adjust the angle. It could look like I'm using you, he said, his eyes searching hers. It could look like I'm doing my job, she replied, and like a woman who knows what it's like when the door doesn't open in time and doesn't want another child to learn that lesson by heart. He exhaled, the weight of her words settling. What do you need from me? Honesty on paper, no polish, your schedule, your costs, your plan if the warehouse shift gets cut. Names of anyone who can testify you're already the father you're trying to be. She paused as if stepping off an unseen curb. And permission to care. Care has strings, he said, his voice low. Everything worth lifting does, she replied. I won't pull. I'll hold. He swallowed, the word heavy, but right. Okay. They ate the pie like a peace treaty, its sweetness a quiet armistice. Elise glanced at her phone and winced. It's late. Your daughter? With a neighbor, he said. Shelf-stable emergencies and responsible adults. We do okay. They stood, the cafe's bell giving a tired cheer as they pushed through the door. Snow slanted under the streetlights, a soft curtain over the city. Halfway back to the tower, the wind sharpened and Elise stopped, her breath clouding the air. You asked what happened to me. Can I ask you something? Anything, he said, his voice a steady anchor. Why didn't you leave? When the court ordered distance, when the job shrank your name, why didn't you cut the rope and drift? He looked at her, his eyes steady as the city's pulse. Because love isn't a promise to feel good. It's a decision to stay useful. Some days that's fixing a relay. Others, it's washing the only clean shirt at midnight so your kid doesn't wear yesterday's worry to school. Useful, Elise Harper echoed, her voice catching the word like a lantern held against the dark. It's not glamorous, but it builds something solid. They reached the revolving doors of Beacon Tower, the glass spinning slow, catching the city's snow-draped glow. She paused, her palm pressing against the door, her breath a quiet cloud. Nathan, she said, her voice softer, trembling with a truth she hadn't voiced in years. One last thing. He waited, his eyes steady, a lighthouse in the storm of her hesitation. I haven't cried in 5 winters, she said, her gaze shimmering, then steadying, as if reclaiming itself from a flood she'd long denied. I couldn't afford the deluge, but tonight, in that cafe, with radio songs from another decade and pie that tasted like mercy, I did. I thought you should know where the crack began. Nathan didn't reach for her, didn't bridge the space with touch. Instead, he offered the one gift that carried no debt. Thank you, he said, his voice low, reverent, for letting the water find air. She nodded, her chin trembling once before she anchored it. Send me what you can by Monday, she said, her voice steady again, a vow wrapped in resolve. I'll do the rest quietly. I don't need the world to know, he replied, his words plain but heavy. Just the judge. They parted at the security desk, the boundary a silent agreement that made the next crossing matter more. Outside, the snow fell relentless, believing in the promise of morning, dusting the city in a quiet hope. Monday arrived like a test that didn't care if you'd studied, its weight settling over the small kitchen table where Nathan stood, spreading documents like a card player guarding his hand. Pay stubs, shift schedules, a foreman's statement, a note from Miss Navarro about supervised visits that cut sharper than the law intended. all laid out with the precision of a man who knew every page was a step toward his daughter. He checked each twice, then slid them into a plain manila folder, addressed in block letters to E. Harper. Lila hovered near the window, winter light casting a soft halo on her golden hair. "Can I add something?" she asked, her voice small but bold. "To the folder?" Nathan looked up, his brow furrowing. She worried her lower lip. "To the week." He softened, a smile breaking through. "What's your something?" "A letter," she said, her eyes bright with purpose. "For the judge. I wrote it last night. I know we need Miss Navarro's okay first. I won't mail it. I just want it to exist." She pulled a folded page from her sketchbook. Her name, Lila Cole, printed at the top in neat, determined pencil. "Can I see?" he asked, his voice gentle, as if handling a fragile relic. She hesitated, then nodded. He unfolded the page, and the words hit him like a door swinging open to a room he hadn't entered in years. "Dear Judge, my dad doesn't wear a suit, but he wears brave. He fixes things when they're scared. He makes soup when the world is cold. He taught me that if you get stuck, you count to 10, breathe twice, and try again. He's not perfect at laundry, but he's perfect at staying. Please let me see him without a grown-up who writes everything down. Love, Lila." Nathan exhaled, a sound like a lock giving way. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice thick. "And it's why we wait for Miss Navarro. Words like these deserve the right envelope." Lila nodded, tucking the letter back into her sketchbook, her small hands protective. "I'll keep it safe," she promised. He gathered the folder, kissed the top of her head. "Pancakes after school. Deal." He stepped into the morning where the air felt like a clear command, sharp and full of purpose. Elise was in her office when he arrived, the Chicago skyline framed behind her like a vow she'd chosen to keep. Her charcoal dress was sharp, her expression sharper, as if she'd already wrestled 3 crises into spreadsheets before 9. "Right on time," she said, closing her laptop with a soft click, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. He handed her the folder. "It's all there, what the court asked for, and what I can give." She lifted the flap, scanning the contents: schedules, pay stubs, a foreman's testimony, Ms. Navarro's note, a budget so modest it made survival look almost elegant. Her fingers paused on a single page, unclipped, folded with the care of small hands, a pencil smudge ghosting the corner. "What's this?" she asked, more to herself than to him, unfolding it before he could answer. The letter wasn't meant for her, yet it struck with the force of a personal address. She read it once, quickly, as if speed could shield her heart. Then again slowly, each word sinking deep, like rain on parched earth. When she looked up, her eyes had changed, softened by a truth she couldn't hide. "Did you mean to include this?" Nathan took a step, startled. "No, that's Lila's. It wasn't supposed to." He stopped, his jaw tight, caught between apology and the ache of wanting something impossible. "I'll take it back." She held the paper gently, like a fragile instrument still capable of song. "No, let me keep it for an hour," she said, her voice soft, reverent. "It's good to be trusted with a letter brave enough to be written." He searched her face, wary. "It wasn't meant for leverage." "It's not leverage," she said, her tone firm but kind. "It's testimony. A beat past, heavy with unspoken trust." He cleared his throat. "If it complicates things—" "Truth complicates things," she interrupted, her smile the kind that made contradictions sit together like old friends. "It also arranges them." She slipped the letter back into the folder, placed it on her desk, and rested her palm on it, grounding them both. "I'll speak to our counsel, not to carry you, but to show the court what already stands." A frayed laugh escaped him. "I'm bristling at being seen. That's all?" Her smile widened, warm and unyielding. "Get used to it." A chime from her computer broke the moment. She glanced at the screen, then back to him, her efficiency a cloak she wore with ease. "I have a board prep in 3 minutes. Can I text you later?" "You have my number," he said. "I do." She gathered the folder, her voice softening. "Nathan, you didn't ask me to make this my business. I'm making it mine anyway." He nodded, accepting the weight of her choice like a medal no one would see. By noon, Elise had broken her own rules. She strode to the legal department, folder in hand, the ice in her ribs thawing under the warmth of purpose. "Elliot," she said to the general counsel, a man who knew which hills were worth fighting for, "I need a fast, quiet path to request a review hearing on a custody visitation order. Pro bono, no signatures from me that suggest personal involvement with an employee. I need it now." Elliot Kane rose, his eyebrows climbing past procedure. "Who?" "Not your concern," she said, sliding the budget across his desk. "Single parent, works here and at night, meets every standard the court claims to want." He skimmed the pages. "He's done the work." "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "What do you need from me?" "A draft motion for review, a list of documents the judge will respect more than adjectives, and a way to file without looking like favoritism." She watched him think, then added, "And this letter." Elliot read Lila's page, his defenses crumbling faster than policy allowed. "We can't submit a child's letter without the guardian ad litem's approval." "I know," Elise said. "We won't, but it'll shape how we write the motion." He nodded, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Give me 48 hours. "You have 24, she said, her tone unyielding. He almost laughed. "You used to bend time only for mergers?" "This is a merger," she said, "between a system and the people it's meant to serve." As she left, she passed a glass wall that reflected her plainly, a woman wielding power without apology. In the elevator, she held the folder close, the corporate chime grating her ear like a word half swallowed. "You sound like someone choking on truth," she whispered to the machine, the absurdity of it sparking a silent laugh. "We'll fix that." The doors opened to the lobby, where Mr. Ellis stood at his post, his presence making stillness feel like service. His eyes, soft but alert, caught the folder without question. "Good morning, Miss Harper," he said. "Morning, Mr. Ellis." She paused, a smile flickering. "What does the building say today?" "We're overdue for kindness," he replied, his voice warm as old wood. "But the delivery truck just pulled up." Her smile was brief but real. "Keep the dock clear." "Always," he said, tipping his cap. That evening, snow slanted across Chicago like a poet's handwriting, each flake a word in a story nearing its end. Nathan walked Lila home from school, the sidewalks crisp with salt. She chattered about a classmate's lizard named Chai. "Because it looks like cinnamon," she said, her wisdom making him feel both proud and older than his years. "Lizards don't drink tea," he teased. "Neither do some people named after it," she shot back, her grin a spark in the winter gloom. At the apartment, she vanished into her room with her sketchbook while Nathan started dinner. Mac and cheese with peas she'd pick out, calling them dots of sadness. His phone buzzed, the number no longer unknown. From EH, "We have a path. Council is drafting. Need proof of stable childcare backup for night shift. Letter from neighbor would help. Also, a simple weekly routine chart. I'll send a template." He replied quickly, "Thank you. I can get a letter from Mrs. Delgado downstairs. She knows Lila's homework schedule by heart." A bubble of typing appeared. "Perfect. One more thing. Don't be seen with me in public for a while. Optics are the cheapest weapons people buy." The words stung, then steadied. "Understood. Doesn't change the work." "No," she wrote. "It protects it." Lila emerged holding a new sketch. "I drew the judge," she announced. Nathan blinked. "You've never met the judge." "I made a version who listens," she said, turning the page to reveal a bench, a robe, a soft mouth, and pencil banners above. "Listen first. Decide last." He laughed, then caught it, as if it might disrespect her art. "Very judicial. Can we make pancakes early?" she asked. "I'm hungry now." "We'll call it Brinner," he said, the pan heating as he thought of Elise's text. A shield, not a rejection. The pull to retreat from help was familiar, but so was the truth. Accepting it wasn't weakness. It was knowing where to spend your strength. After dinner, while Lila rinsed plates with the rhythm of a game, Nathan opened his email. Elise's template was there, unromantic and perfect. Boxes for wake, school, aftercare, dinner, homework, bedtime. He filled it in, each line a quiet claim. "We live here. We keep time. We show up." A second email held a scanned motion draft, its nouns, consideration, demonstration, sounding like hope in disguise. He forwarded it to Ms. Navarro, adding a note. P.S. There's a letter my daughter wrote, not submitted, not yet. But it's the truest thing in the room. When it's time, tell us where to put it. He hit send before doubt could steal his faith. In her apartment, Elise stood by the window, the city sprawling like a map of choices unmade. She set Lila's letter on her desk, its words a lighthouse in her storm. A glass paperweight, a tiny storm trapped inside, held it in place. From a drawer, she drew a faded sonogram, grainy and miraculous, and pressed her thumb to the blur that had been Clara. I know, she whispered. I know. Her phone chimed, a reminder from a past self. Donor preview, optics. She dismissed it, her reflection in the glass clear, unadorned. A woman who'd learned the difference between secrecy and privacy. She opened her laptop and began an email to a judge she'd never meet, about a father who didn't ask to be carried, and a child brave enough to write letters she didn't mail. She ended with a sentence that broke free of corporate restraint. Steady as the courage to be seen when you can't control the ending. She clicked save, not send, letting the words wait for a witness. Outside, her building's elevator glided past, its chimes small, apologetic. Soon, she told it, we'll let you speak. Emmy, de Sirrenmannen, Risun. A scream, faint as a machine's whimper, pierced the silence of the 17th floor. It threaded through the ventilation, a child's soprano snagged on the building's ribs, fragile yet urgent. Nathan, kneeling by the interface housing he'd labeled check here first, froze, the sound stitching itself to his spine. He listened again, parsing the hum of the traction motor and the soft whir of fan belts. There, a second cry, swallowed quickly, the kind a child makes when told bravery is their job. He grabbed his radio. Ops, this is Cole on 17. Distress cry in the shaft. Shut down dispatch on all cars. Repeat, hold all cars in place. Confirm. Static crackled, then Mr. Carver's voice, breathless with irritation and fear. Confirmed. Stuck car between 16 and 17. Private tenant tour. Kids slipped when the group panicked. Doors faulted open a few inches. Fires en route. You are not to... Nathan was already running, his boots pounding the floor he'd coaxed back from the past. The 17th floor landing was a battlefield of fear, a cluster of adults near the shaft, two assistants gripping each other's hands, a guard frozen, a man in an expensive coat shouting to drown his panic. The elevator doors gapped an inch and a half, a sliver of darkness leaking a moan that wasn't metal. Back up, Nathan said, his voice calm, a command forged in certainty. Sir, you can't, the guard began. Listen to the man who knows the names of things, Mr. Ellis said, arriving like a steady bell, his hand guiding the guard aside with quiet authority. Elise pushed through the crowd, her hair loose from its careful knot, her eyes blazing with a clarity born of surviving her worst day. Where are we? Nathan asked, his palms flattening against the cool seam of the doors. Between floors, she said, her voice a lifeline. He dropped to the inspection panel, keyed it open, and killed the local call. Ops, lock out power to car 2. Tag it. No one re-energizes without my voice. Confirm. Confirm, Carver said, his bluster wrung dry. Fire's 3 minutes out. 3 minutes is forever when you're 10, Nathan murmured, mostly to the door. He pressed his mouth to the gap, his voice steady as a promise. Hey, it's Nathan. I fix scared machines. What's your name? Nathan Cole's voice cut through the darkness of the elevator shaft, steady as a lifeline thrown to a drowning child. A hiccuped breath answered, fragile but alive. Evan. Hi, Evan. Got any superpowers? Nathan asked, his tone warm, coaxing courage from fear. A sniffle, then a small voice. I can count really fast. That's the best one, Nathan said, a smile threading through his words. Here's our trick. You count, I crawl. We meet somewhere brave. Elise Harper crouched beside him, her presence a quiet anchor in the chaos. What do you need? Wedge? Strap? Light? Her voice was sharp, practical, but laced with a tremor of memory. He didn't look at her. Seconds were too precious to spend. "And your voice," he said gently. "Tell the room to be quiet." Fear echoes. "We need stillness." She rose and the room obeyed before she spoke, her authority a soft command that silenced panic. "Everyone, back 10 feet, she said, her voice clear as cut glass. "No commentary, no phones. If you pray, do it silently, and mean it." Silence fell, heavy and reverent, like a congregation holding its breath. Nathan forced the elevator doors a fraction wider with a rubber wedge, revealing the shaft's steel ribs, cables glinting like veins in the dust-flecked emergency light. The car sat inches below the sill, a stubborn beast. Through the gap, he saw small sneakers pressed against the door's inner edge, and to the right, a tiny hand, white-knuckled, clutching a scrap of molding. "Evan," he called, sliding a strap through the gap with a mechanic's blind grace, looping it around the car's door handle. "I'm opening this a little. You'll see my face. Don't let go until I say the line. We leave breathing. Got it?" A shaky exhale. "Got it." He braced himself, boots firm against the floor. "Elise, on my count, push with me. Gentle. We don't want to bounce." She knelt, palms steady against the cold metal. "I'm here. 1, 2, hold." They leaned into the seam, the door resisting before yielding a sliver, persuaded more by their resolve than force. The gap widened, just enough. Nathan slid his arm in, the metal biting cold into his forearm. His fingers found Evan's jacket, then the frantic thud of a heart racing too fast. "Okay, buddy," he said, his voice even as a pulse. "You're stuck because the car settled. I'm lifting you an inch, pulling you through the safest way. My sleeve might scrape you. That's normal. I'll take it all." "I'm scared," Evan whispered, the words barely audible. "Me too," Nathan said, his honesty a bridge. "That means we're awake." Elise lowered her head to the gap, her voice softened by a memory that carried both mercy and pain. "Evan, I have a rule. When you're afraid, count 10 true things. I'll start. 1, my name is Elise. 2, the floor is solid beneath my feet. 3, I see your shoes and they're very brave. 4, Evan managed, his voice trembling. I can smell peppermint from your coat. Elise smiled into the dark, her heart catching. 5, the man next to me always keeps promises. 6, Nathan said, his breath steady as stone. On 3, we move. 1, 2. He pulled, a clean, practiced motion that respected the hinges and the boy. Evan slid, snagged briefly, then came free, his small body colliding with Nathan's chest. A shoe caught the sill. Nathan took the brunt against his shoulder, pain lancing like a hot wire through muscle. He didn't flinch where Evan could feel it, tucking the boy tight and rolling backward to safety. The room exhaled, a single primal sound. A hand clapped over a mouth. The guard made a noise he didn't know he could. Mr. Ellis crossed himself, unapologetic, his eyes bright with quiet faith. Elise dropped to the floor beside them, her voice urgent but soft. "Evan, look at me." 2 enormous eyes, wet and indignant at their own fear, met hers. "I didn't cry," he said, as if filing a report to the world. "I did," she said, her smile fragile but honest. "You just couldn't see it." Evan's father, his expensive coat now a humbled shroud, fell to his knees, his thanks a stammered prayer. Nathan handed the boy over gently. "You're okay," he told Evan, his voice a steady vow. "You were useful. That's what brave does. It stays useful." Firefighters arrived, their gear and protocol a storm of efficiency. A lieutenant surveyed the scene, the gap, the wedge, Nathan's steady hands, and gave a single nod, the kind that said good work without words. Medics checked Evan, who declared the pulse oximeter a robot finger, and forgave its intrusion. Mr. Carver shouldered through, red-faced, his authority thinning. Cole, what part of fires en route suggested heroics? Nathan stood slowly, rolling his shoulder with a wince he filed for later. "The part where 3 minutes is forever for a child," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. Power was locked out. The door was secured. It was the safest move. "We'll review this in the morning," Carver snapped. "Review bravery," Mr. Ellis said mildly, his words a gentle rebuke. See if we can order more. Elise stepped forward, her voice ice-sharp, precise as a scalpel. Mr. Carver, if you discipline a man for doing the right thing safely, you'll do it without my consent. And publicly. Carver's mouth opened, then recalibrated. Of course, Miss Harper. For the record, Cole acted within an emergency exception. Good, she said, turning to Nathan, her eyes catching the slight hunch of his shoulder. You're hurt. I'm fine, he said, brushing it off. That's not a diagnosis, she replied, her tone firm. Medbay, now. He should have refused, but the throb in his shoulder, torque and bruise, not tear, yielded to her insistence. He nodded once. In the service elevator, Elise matched his measured pace, her presence a quiet strength. What did you tell yourself in there? She asked, her voice soft, searching. The same thing I told Evan, he said. We leave breathing. Her breath caught, the hallway flickering with the memory of a night she'd almost not crossed. Thank you, she said, 2 syllables heavy with the gratitude of a woman who refused to owe but insisted on honoring. You're welcome, he said, his eyes meeting hers, steady as a vow. In the medbay, a nurse with a voice like competence itself palpated his shoulder, strapped on a compression band, and gave instructions that sounded like a recipe for patience. Elise waited outside the curtain, arms folded, her gaze fixed on an invisible line only she could see. When he emerged, she straightened. The press will want this, she said. We can't hide it. We shouldn't. A child was rescued in a building that knows how to apologize when it scares someone. But we'll tell it right. Right? He asked, his voice testing her. With the verbs that matter, she said. Locked out, secured, assessed, lifted. We'll honor the fire team, the boy, and we'll say your name. You don't have to say my name, he said, his tone plain but firm. I know, she replied, her voice soft but resolute. But I choose to. They stepped into the lobby, where camera phones had already rehearsed their angles, hungry for a story. Elise faced the press cluster, her posture turning chaos into order, microphones rising like flowers to the sun. At approximately 4:18 p.m., she began, her voice level, clean. An elevator car stopped between floors 16 and 17. A child was briefly caught at the door. Our employee, Mr. Nathan Cole, executed a safe, locked-out rescue in coordination with security and with first responders en route. The child is stable. We're conducting a full systems review and will report findings. Today ends with gratitude, she concluded, her words a quiet anthem. A reporter called out, Ms. Harper, are you endorsing staff acting outside protocol? I'm endorsing steady hands and clear heads, she said, her gaze unflinching. And a building culture that chooses people over optics in an emergency. Another voice pushed through. Mr. Cole, how did it feel? Nathan met the lenses, hating how they translated him into glass. He chose a sentence Lila would understand. It felt like doing the next right thing until the door opened. Elise's lips tilted, as if his words had handed her something to carry. They turned away, the microphones murmuring with the greed of machines craving more. Ahead, the security doors offered a corridor free of cameras. At the threshold, Elise's phone chimed, the board's group thread lighting up with sharp words. Optics. Liability. Who authorized statement? We need to discuss boundaries with operations staff. Elise, call. She glanced at the screen, then at Nathan. The board will have feeling, she said, her tone dry as winter air. Boards do, he replied. So do elevators. You teach both to speak, or they scare people. Will you rest? She asked, her eyes searching. I'll work, he said. Then I'll rest. Of course you will, she said, a faint smile tracing her lips. She scratched something on her palm with her nail, an old habit from days when paper was scarce. 2 letters N over C, a quiet marker of memory. By evening, the story had outrun the building, spilling across local news. Grainy footage showed a man in a navy shirt pulling a child through a perilous gap, a CEO's voice choosing gratitude over liability. Comments bloomed online, like a city after rain, words like hero making Nathan's skin itch. He preferred nouns that faced the work head-on. But Lila curled on the couch with his jacket draped over her like a tent, squeezed his hands so fiercely He thought Bone might admire Bone. "That's you," she whispered, her eyes wide with pride. "That's the sound of right." "It's just steady," he said, his voice soft but sure. "Let the pride stand with them a minute." In her apartment, Elise watched the same footage, her phone pulsing with the board chair's number, a bruise blossoming on the screen. She let it ring once, twice, then answered, her voice even as stone. "I'm here," she said. "And before you ask, yes, I said his name." A pause, a lecture forming. She looked out at the city, where elevators rose and fell like patient lungs. "You can have my position," she added, her voice quiet but immovable as weather, "when you take my reasons." Silence stretched, then the argument shifted. She hung up, standing at the window until her reflection merged with the night. On her table, a glass paperweight cradled a tiny storm over Lila's letter. She tapped it once, like a conductor calling the orchestra to rise. "Steady," she told the room. "Steady, and we rise." The conference room stretched long, its polished table gleaming like a stage for judgment. Elise took her seat at the head, spine straight, hands folded as if they too were listening. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass, Chicago wore its winter like a tailored coat, sharp and unyielding. Inside, the board wielded concern like a weapon. "Let's begin," said Chairwoman Margaret Voss, stacking papers with conclusions already carved in stone. Public sentiment is effusive. She tapped a printout of headlines. "Janitor saves child. CEO praises steady hands." Her voice measured. "It's trending in our favor for now, but there are liabilities." "Say liability once more," Elise replied, her tone even but pointed. "And it might become a person. Let's discuss specifics." The CFO cleared his throat, his voice heavy with caution. "Optics, Elise. You named an hourly employee at a press gaggle. People will ask why he was near a VIP tour, what training he had, and whether you have a relationship that clouds your judgment." Elise let the accusation hang in the board's air, not her lungs. "We have footage, protocols, and a fire lieutenant who signed off on Mr. Cole's actions," she said, her voice a blade of clarity. "We also have a child who slept in his own bed last night." Voss laced her fingers, her gaze sharp. "We're not debating the rescue. We're debating perception. You are visible. Any hint of impropriety invites the kind of attention that redefines us without our consent," Chairwoman Margaret Voss said, her voice crisp as snow, her eyes narrowing like a blade honed by caution. "What do you require, Elise?" Elise Harper kept her breath measured, her words cut to fit the moment. "A message," Voss replied, her tone sharp. "A statement to operations reminding staff to defer to protocol and avoid freelancing. And a personal boundary. No further appearances with Mr. Cole. No private meetings. If he enters your orbit, it's as a committee member with minutes or not at all." "You're asking me to make a good man invisible because he did his job well," Elise said, her voice steady, a shield against the board's storm. "We're asking you to preserve the institution you lead," Voss countered, her words a lever on a fulcrum. "Or choose otherwise." Elise's gaze didn't waver. "When I took this seat, we wrote a value statement. People over optics when emergencies demand it. That line wasn't meant to bend to sentiment." "Sentiment," the CFO murmured, his voice a soft dismissal. "Nor am I," Elise said, a faint smile flickering and fading, sharp as a spark. "I'm covering responsibility." A lawyer slid a memorandum across the table, HR's careful prose ready for her sign-off. "We remind all staff that deviation from protocol, even with good intentions, can invite undue risk." Elise set it down, her voice firm. "We will not punish courage in code. Revise it. We thank all staff who act with calm in emergencies. Where protocol fails, we will circulate best practices so courage is safer next time." Voss's brows lifted, surprise etched in her silence. "You will not be moved." "I will be led by better language," Elise said, closing her portfolio with a soft snap. "Words teach culture." "Anything else?" "One last matter," Voss said, her tone gentle, the kind that announces a knife. "There's concern you may be emotionally entangled with this employee. We can't forbid that, but we can forbid the appearance of favoritism. Choose, Elise, your distance or your chair." Elise met her eyes unflinching. "Distance does not threaten my ethics. Silence would." A ripple passed through the table. Pens straightened. A cough broke the quiet. Voss nodded, as if consenting to inevitable weather. Very well. Operate with judgment. Protect the tower. We will revisit. The board adjourned, members drifting to the doors with the relief of those who'd performed duty without inviting conscience to linger. Elliot Kane lingered, his lawyerly calm a quiet offer. Want consolation? It's not made of coffee. Elise's smile was faint but real. You held the line without burning the bridge. That's not common. I'm tired of common, she said, then softened. Thank you for the motion work. We'll have the neighbor's letter today. He tapped the folder he carried. Draft by evening. For what it's worth, I have 2 kids. If a man like Cole wants to be seen by a judge, I want to hand him the light. Me too, she said, her voice a quiet vow. Nathan didn't wait for news. He knew the sound of storms in buildings, the way they gathered in corners and whispered through corridors. That afternoon, he found Elise in the service corridor off the lobby, a shadowed path leaders took to avoid being seen. Before you say anything, he began, his voice steady on purpose. I'm resigning. Her eyes widened, a flash of heat cutting through her calm. No. It protects the work you're doing, he said, his words measured, heavy. I'll pick up warehouse hours, find a new day shift. The board won't need to invent rules around a ghost they don't see. Don't make yourself a ghost to make my life easier, she said, her voice sharp with conviction. That's not the deal. Deals change, he countered. Lila's review is weeks away. I can't risk a mess. If my name next to yours hurts the motion, I'll cut every tie but the one I hold in court. You think your dignity demands a vanishing act? She said, stepping closer, her eyes fierce. It doesn't. It demands you stand and claim what you've earned. What I've earned is a reputation for being useful, he said, his gaze dropping to his scarred, scraped hands. I can be useful elsewhere. She took a breath, choosing her ground like a soldier picking a hill. I won't accept your resignation today. If you're quitting to appease my board, that's theater. If it's for Lila's 3 points with the judge, show me the math. Otherwise, stand your ground. He opened his mouth, closed it, the corridor humming with the weight of her words. An elevator chimed somewhere, its tired apology a reminder of a promise he'd made to fix it. You're asking me to let you take the heat. I'm asking you to trust I know my temperature, she said, her voice steady as stone, and that I don't trade people for comfort. He looked at his hands, unremarkable yet steady. What if the noise gets too loud? Then we speak more clearly, she said, and if clarity fails, we speak again. People don't usually stand with me this long, he said, his voice low, testing. I don't stand with usual, she replied, her eyes unwavering. He nodded once, revising an exit plan. One condition, you put everything in writing. If you need distance, tell me in sentences I can respect. You have my word, she said, and a memo. A faint smile broke through, and he almost returned it. That evening, the apartment smelled of pancakes. Lila having declared a holiday she called Later is Now. She flipped a lopsided disc with a joy that made it seem professionally plated. Did anything good happen? She asked, maple syrup plotting adventures across her plate. Yes, Nathan said, his voice soft but sure, and something hard that might become good. You always say that, she said, chewing thoughtfully. It usually comes true. When she settled with her sketchbook, Nathan stepped into the hallway, phone in hand, and called the number that had woven itself into their lives. Elise picked up on the first ring. I didn't accept, he said. She laughed softly, a rustle of papers in the background. I didn't insist. Progress, he said, a grin tugging at his lips. Elliot has the draft. Ms. Navarro is aligned. I need the neighbor's letter by tomorrow. You'll have it, he said. Elise, he added, his voice gentler. I'm sorry the board made you measure me against fear again. I've been doing that since I was 10, he said. The ruler's familiar. Then throw it away, she said, her voice fierce with care. Measure yourself against love. The line held quiet, long enough to mean yes. The next morning, Beacon Tower's lobby felt like a city square, people softening as they passed Mr. Ellis's desk, Winter arguing gently with the revolving doors. Elise crossed with purpose, her mouth unguarded, a fragile brand of courage. Ms. Harper, Mr. Ellis said, straightening as if greeting a guest of honor in a place that had rediscovered the word. A minute, she said, and he reached beneath the desk, producing a long cardboard tube, dented at one end, a clumsy band of masking tape bearing the name Beacon Tower Concept. Found it in storage, he said. Filed wrong, like most good ideas. She eased off the cap, sliding out a brown blueprint, its hand-drawn lines warmer than any screen. Two names in the title block, penciled with care. James Harper, and beneath it, Elias Ward. Her father's steady engineer's script paired with a hesitant hand, likely a worker who'd earned a corner of the page. Mr. Ellis pointed to a note in the margin, faint in her father's fatherly pencil. 17th floor, gathering hall. No key cards. Bridge the suits and shoes. People first. Elise's throat tightened, memories flooding back. Standing on a stool at a drafting table, watching her father draw the invisible line that held the building together. Who was Ward? She asked. A lift man who knew how to listen, Mr. Ellis said. Your father trusted those with dirty hands and clean eyes. She held the paper like a flag that had chosen her, the note glowing in tired graphite. Thank you, she said, 2 words of prayer that had learned to walk. Some floors close because we forget what they were, Mr. Ellis said. Perhaps it's time to remember, she replied, rolling the blueprint carefully, her heart beating at a kinder tempo. The board could storms clear air. She had a map now, drawn by a man who saw buildings as verbs. Nathan arrived on the night shift, 2 coffees in hand, his shoulder still admitting its ache. Elise waited by the elevator he'd promised to teach to sing. I have something, she said, handing him the tube. From my father. A note about floor 17. He wanted a bridge. Nathan read the margin, his eyes brightening, a subtle spark. That's a sentence a city can live inside. Yes, she said, and a board can argue with. They will, he said. Let them. Bridges don't ask permission from the river. Her laugh was brief, astonished at the shape of his words. Will you help me redraw it? Not as a gesture, but a foundation. Only if we start with the chime, he said, his voice steady, so people know they're safe when they arrive. Done, she said. The elevator hummed, resigned to its current voice, but soon it would carry a promise kept by those who understood vows. They stood in a rectangle of lobby light, the blueprint between them, the city's reflection framing their silhouettes. Neither reached for the other's hand, but they held the future by its margin, reading words penciled strong enough to outlast grief. People first. In Elise's apartment, the blueprint lay unrolled across her dining table, yellowed edges curling like a patient awaiting care. The pencil notes, her father's sure hand, Elias Ward's quieter scrawl, radiated a warmth no screen could mimic. Outside, Chicago's winter pressed against the glass, a quiet insistence. She traced the margin again. 17th floor, gathering hall, no key cards, bridge the suits and shoes, people first. Grief and resolve met at a fragile hinge, and she turned to the hall closet, pulling down a long, unsorted box labeled James H., the misc and irritating ghost of her father's name. She cut the tape, revealing a time capsule of love, company pins, a bent protractor, a badge from the tower's opening night, faintly scented with cigar and cologne. Beneath a leather portfolio held a page that stopped her breath. A memo draft, never sent, addressed to the board of directors. Floor 17, Pilot Community Access Atrium. Rationale: a building is not a vault, it is a civic organ. Floor 17 will host free legal clinics on Thursdays, job fairs on Saturdays, and hot coffee every morning without ID checks. You get more loyalty from kindness than key cards. Below, her father had drawn a crooked, smiley face, as if shy of his own earnestness. Elise laughed, then covered her mouth, tears falling like good news arriving late. She set the page beside the blueprint and took a legal pad, the title writing itself. Bridge Hall Foundation Draft. She listed what the space could hold. Legal aid for day laborers, free financial counseling, resume clinics with honest feedback, evening workshops led by custodial staff on maintenance basics, a warm room on the coldest days with coffee that demanded no badge. She added a line that belonged to no budget but every heart. Dignity is the cheapest security system. Her phone buzzed. Elliot Kane from legal. I've got the revised motion and filing path, he said. Navarro's aligned. Also, I saw a ghost today. Which one? She asked, a smile in her voice. Your father's note in your handwriting, he said dryly. You're building the bridge, aren't you? I'm remembering it, she said. I need a foundation that outlasts boardroom storms. Then we make it a separate legal entity, he said, with you as founder and a diverse advisory council. The company partners doesn't own, keeps politics out of mercy. Name Bridge Hall, she said. Mission, bridge the suits and shoes. First hire, a coordinator who listens. First invite, he cut in, a smile in his voice. Let me guess. Nathan, she said, staring at the blueprint. As co-founder, not a mascot, a decision maker. Optics will scream, he warned. Optics can write their own letter, she said. We'll write ours. She hung up, then texted Mr. Ellis. Are you awake? Buildings don't sleep, came the reply. Come to my apartment. I need a witness before I make a promise. An hour later, Mr. Ellis stood at her table, peering through his readers at the blueprint. James would have loved foundation, he said. A word with feet. I need a pledge before I face the board, Elise said. Not money, courage. You have more than you think, he said, tapping the margin where Ward had signed. That man showed your father where to put the screws. Maybe we can return the favor. Will you serve on the advisory council? She asked, sudden and sure. If you'll let an old doorman die at a meeting someday, he said, poker-faced, then grinned when she choked on a laugh. Yes, I'll stand with my first and last name. She printed the draft charter and signed it, Mr. Ellis as her witness. Then she slid a second page across. Invitation, co-founder. Should I deliver it? He asked, already mapping the route. Yes, she said, not as a favor, but as a message from the building to the man who listens. He tucked the envelope into his coat like a relic. At the door, he paused. The board will ask if you're building this to polish a story. I'm building it to tell the truth, she said. Stories polish themselves when truth stands long enough. Wear good shoes, he said. Truth has stairs. Nathan found the envelope taped to his apartment door, arriving with Lila and a lopsided bag of oranges and the cheapest good bread in Chicago. Lila spotted the Beacon Tower seal and stood on her toes. Is it trouble? Only one way to find out, he said, sliding a thumb beneath the flap. The letter was brief, heavy with purpose. Nathan, I found a map my father and a lift man drew together, mislabeled miscellaneous, where good things go when people stop paying attention. Lila read the letter twice, her small hands holding it with the reverence of a child in church. You have to say yes, she said, her voice solemn, her eyes bright with conviction. It's illegal to say no to bridges. Nathan Cole stared at the page, the words heavy enough to make the groceries in their lopsided bag consider thawing. He thought of the boardroom storms Elise had faced, standing like weather you could trust. He saw the blueprint's margin, penciled by hands that knew steel and grief. He heard Lila's letter, its small, invincible voice echoing in his chest. He remembered the relief on a child's face when a door finally opened. I'll need better shirts, he said, a half-smile breaking through. I can draw you some, Lila replied, her grin a spark in the winter dimness. Tomorrow, he said to the letter, to the city, to the ache that had learned to stand beside hope without quarreling. Yes. At dawn, the 17th floor of Beacon Tower was a soft-lit hush, its air carrying the quiet promise of a new day. Nathan arrived with a thermos, a notebook, and a fresh compression bandage hugging his shoulder. Elise was already there, her hair pulled back, the blueprint pinned to a portable board. Paper cups of coffee steaming like early vows. You look awake, he said, his voice warm with a trace of surprise. I think I am, she said, her eyes meeting his, steady and unguarded. Walk me through what this room needs before I choose paint that means well, but lies. He opened his notebook, its pages worn but sure. Start with thresholds. The door must not intimidate. No badge readers, just clear signage with verbs. Ask, sit, learn, eat, warm. A low desk where someone meets your eye sitting, not an edifice built to shrink you. Coat hooks at 3 levels, for kids, adults, the elderly. Storage? She asked, her pen poised, ready to capture his truth. Lockers with combinations, not keys people can lose. For dignity, not just belongings. Seating? She prompted, her voice a quiet invitation. Mixed. Chairs with arms for those who need help standing. Stools for quick stops. Couches firm enough to rise from, not traps that swallow you. A kid's corner with activities that don't shame teenagers. Sound, she said, her eyes flickering with memory. You hate the echo. Soft ceiling panels, rugs that clean with a stern look, a space where voices don't apologize for being alive. He tapped the panel box he'd coaxed into honesty for weeks. And the chime, change it. A major third resolving to the root, warm at the end. It tells the body you're not about to be punished. Her smile was soft, awed. That sentence alone might be worth a wing, he continued undeterred. Services schedule. Legal aid on Thursday evenings when people can come. Job fairs with companies that hire on the spot. A corner staffed by someone who translates forms into language that breathes. Food that's not an afterthought. Coffee that doesn't taste like a dare. And rules? She asked, her pen hovering. He thought for a moment. 4. No ID required. No questions you don't need to ask. No photographing people's mercy. Leave cleaner and kinder than you arrived. She wrote them exactly as he said, her pen steady, then set it down. Co-founder, she said, the word unwavering, a vow. Will you do this with me? Yes, he said, his voice a quiet anchor. Good. She drew a draft mission statement from her folder. Read, Mark. Rewrite where I sound like someone raised on agendas. He read, then tapped the first paragraph. This line, we welcome those who maintain the building and those who own it. Flip it. We welcome those who own the building and those who maintain it. Then add, on Bridge Hall, ownership is behavior. The one who cares is the one who belongs. She stared, then nodded, her eyes bright with recognition. That's the sentence donors will remember, even if they don't admit it. Speaking of donors, he said, his tone wry, how do we keep this from becoming a cocktail hour with good intentions and bad follow-through? We set a budget that works without applause, she said. Fund operating costs before furniture. Hire a coordinator from inside the building. Publish a ledger with 3 columns. Dollars in, hours given, doors open. Hours given, he echoed, a smile tugging at his lips. Your father's favorite donation. Time that meant it, she said, her voice soft with memory. They worked until the light on 17 felt like morning in a town that remembered its name. At 8:45, Mr. Ellis arrived, bearing donuts and a clipboard that had crossed more thresholds than most. He listened to the rules, nodded at the chime, and signed his name beneath advisory council with a flourish that made the pen proud. At 9:10, Elliot Kane arrived with papers, articles of incorporation, a bare-bones budget, liability realities dressed in friendly fonts. I brought 2 charters, he said, one with Elise as sole founder, one with both names. I recommend the second if you want the story to behave. We don't want a story, Nathan said. We want a room. Same thing, if you do it right, Elliot replied, a smile in his eyes. Elise took the pen. Then we sign, as if the room already exists. They did in a rectangle of light Mr. Ellis had once called a prayer. Press? Elliot asked. There'll be questions later, Elise said. The first release goes to the people who need the room. We'll worry about cameras after the coffee's hot. We need a name for the chime, Mr. Ellis said, his voice warm. Every good bell has one, Nathan considered. Call it the promise. Elise nodded. Then program the promise. Nathan crossed to the panel, fingers itching to erase the fear that had bitten the corporate tone since the day he arrived. A minute of code, a cautious test, and the chime sang. 2 notes, clear and human, the second falling home like a weary traveler finding a porch light. Elise's eyes shone. That sounds like welcome. Good, he said, because welcome is the only door I want people to remember. Her phone buzzed, Margaret Voss. She silenced it. Another buzz, a text from communications asking for language for a community initiative. She typed back, it's not an initiative, it's a room. Draft to follow. She turned to Nathan. After we file, we invite one more person. Who? He asked, though he sensed the answer. She held up Lila's letter, tucked in her portfolio. The girl who taught us how to end a sentence. We asked Lila to draw the first sign on the door. What should it say? He asked, his voice soft, knowing. Her smile was the kind that kept promises. We fix. We rise. Nathan exhaled, a breath that carried winter out and left room for warmth. Then let's wire the past so the future stops flickering. They stood side by side, co-founders by law and need, listening to an elevator tell the story it was meant to tell. 2 notes, a door that opened. The chime rang, clear and human, and people looked up, as if a small, ancient part of them heard. You're safe. Come in. Bridge Hall had been remade, its changes quiet but profound. The light fell warm, not clinical. The air carried no echo. A long table along the far wall held coffee that didn't taste like penance and pastries from a bakery that wrapped kindness in twine. Not logos. Chairs waited without judging posture, and a kid's corner offered crayons and dignity. On the wall by the softened elevator bank, a hand-lettered sign by a 10-year-old read, We fix. We rise. Nathan stood at the crowd's edge, his thumb grazing the compression wrap beneath his shirt, more habit than pain. He watched people enter, tenants, custodial staff, office workers who'd never ventured past the executive floors. A woman with a tote of legal pamphlets and a coat patched at the elbow moved with cautious hope. Mr. Ellis floated among them, his kindness stitching the room together, naming, greeting, anchoring. Elise stepped onto a small riser borrowed from events. No grand stage, just 2 sound wedges and a microphone with a soft windscreen. She wore a navy suit, unadorned, but for a tiny silver bell pin, glinting like a vow. She didn't tap the mic, waiting instead for breath, conversation, and the promised chime to align in rhythm. Welcome to the Bridge Hall Foundation, she said, her voice a foundation you could stand on. We're not launching a brand. We're opening a room. The room listened, its silence reverent. She rested a hand on the framed blueprint to her right. When my father sketched this floor, he wrote, Bridge the suits and shoes. He meant something simple, subversive. Buildings are for people, not just plans. Today we begin what was drawn but never delivered. She glanced at her notes but didn't need them. 4 rules are on the door. No ID required, no questions you don't need to ask, no photographing mercy, leave cleaner and kinder than you arrived. If you can live with that, this place is yours. A murmur rippled through the crowd, the kind that says a room has remembered its purpose. I didn't build this alone, Elise said, her voice softening. Nothing worth keeping is built alone. She looked left. Mr. Cole, Nathan joined her on the riser, meeting the ripple of applause with the quiet of a keel steadying a ship. This is my co-founder, Elise said. Some know him as the man who coaxes machines to honesty. I know him as the leader most institutions overlook, because leadership looks different with a mop. A reporter in the back raised a phone, but Mr. Ellis's gentle, unyielding glance sent it back to a pocket. Nathan leaned to the mic, his voice steady enough to steady others. We fixed the chime so it tells your body you're not about to be punished. Smiles bloomed. He nodded at the blueprint. This floor will do simple things well. Hot coffee, forms that breathe, a place to sit without apology, services when people can come. We'll post a schedule. If we get it wrong, tell us. We'll fix the thing, and our tone. He stepped back, and Elise returned to the mic. Before we open the doors to the legal clinic and job fair, we honor those whose steady hands made this possible. The pro bono counsel who drafted motions without seeking logos, the day porter who tested the chime and called it less obnoxious than most meetings, the union rep who secured volunteer hours without asking workers to give what they didn't have, the bakery owner who said yes before hearing the price and don't worry after. And one more, she said, her voice softening. Mr. Ellis, who's held this building's breath longer than most of us have been breathing. The old doorman raised his cap, his eyes bright. I just keep the door from learning bad habits, he said, sparking a warm ripple of laughter. Elise glanced to the side where a small figure fidgeted with a bouquet tied in blue ribbon. Lila, will you join us? Heads turned. Nathan's breath hitched, then steadied. His daughter walked forward, her shoes clicking like a brave metronome, her blue dress with its sparkly belt no longer a costume, but a uniform of joy. She climbed the riser, taking Elise's offered hand with the dignity only children carry unpracticed. The room gave her the quiet she deserved. For the woman who fixed more than a plan, Lila said into the mic, her voice clear, sure. Thank you for making a bridge. She held out the bouquet. Elise took it, as if accepting a medal she hadn't sought but could finally claim. Thank you, Lila, she said, her voice soft at the edges. You wrote a letter once. I read it with my whole spine. Lila beamed. You can borrow my crayons if you need new words. Laughter rose, warm and precise. Lila turned to Nathan, her eyes making him both stagehand and star. Ms. Navarro called Dad this morning. The judge read the motion. The review hearing set. She looked back at the room, letting the sentence land without chasing applause. A child's wildly adult grace. The cheer came anyway. Not a roar, but a held sound. The kind a room makes when it refuses to let one family carry joy alone. Nathan swallowed hard, then clapped with the crowd, feeling Elise's glance find him. Not possessive, not shy, but an agreement. We'll post details on the notice board, Elise said, practical again. Now doors open. Legal clinic to the left, resume table straight ahead, coffee on the right, kids' corner behind the pillar with the plant that refuses to die. The crowd moved like water finding its path. The promise chimes sounded gentle and sure as the elevator welcomed someone new, and for once, no one flinched. The next hour rewrote what Bridge Hall remembered. A woman with a grocery badge sat with a pro bono lawyer, learning wage theft had a name and a remedy. A young man in a faded hoodie held his resume on thick paper, proof he wasn't imagining himself. An elderly tenant hummed the chimes 2 notes until her shoulders forgot to brace. The kids' corner became an embassy, crayons negotiating new flags. Nathan and Elise moved through the room without choreography, their timing perfect. He fixed a loose glide on a storage drawer before it was noticed. She untied a logistics knot at the job table with questions that cut to the heart. Together they stood by the blueprint, adjusting its tape, straightening corners no one else saw, building a room that welcomed without asking for proof. Nathan Cole and Elise Harper moved through Bridge Hall, their paths crossing near the blueprint, where they adjusted tape and straightened corners no one else noticed, as if tending to a living thing. Your chime is working, Elise said, pausing beside him, her voice soft with wonder, her eyes catching the warm light of the room. So's your budget, Nathan replied, a half smile tugging at his lips. I've never seen coffee disappear that politely. Her smile was brief but radiant, a spark in the morning's glow. I filed the articles this morning. We're officially a thing. Then we should do what we promised, he said, his voice steady as stone. Invite those who never thought this door was for them. He nodded toward 2 custodians hovering at the threshold, their hesitance a line learned from years of unseen labor. Elise crossed to them without fanfare, her presence a quiet invitation. She returned with them smiling, coats open, hands warming around cups that asked no names. Good, Nathan said, his voice a quiet vow. That. Mr. Carver appeared at the room's edge, his bright tie clashing with the humility in his step, as if he'd followed an old instinct for order and found a new definition. Ms. Harper, Cole, he said, his voice softer than his usual bluster. I came to observe, Elise cut in, her tone neither sweet nor sharp. Then observe. You'll see people behave better when the room behaves first. Carver's eyes swept the space, the rules posted without threat, Mr. Ellis guiding a teenager to the donut with the most frosting for scholarly reasons. A woman laughing with a lawyer as if laughter were a legal right. His shoulders eased half an inch. It's working, he admitted, chastened. It's starting, Nathan corrected, his voice firm but kind. Working's what we call it when it's still doing this in 6 months. Carver nodded, a flicker of relief softening his edges. Near the kids' corner, Lila sat with a younger boy struggling to cut paper straight. Pretend the scissors are a little elevator, she said, her voice patient, wise. It only goes where you guide it. Don't rush. It gets dizzy. Nathan watched, his chest tight with pride he didn't let spill into tears. Her steadiness of family trade passed down in quiet moments. Mr. Cole, Mr. Ellis called softly, his voice a gentle bell. Your attention, please. He stood by the notice board, one hand on a copper service bell from a bygone hotel, polished until it held light like a promise. A room deserves a sound when words begin, he said. We have a chime for doors. This is for promises. Elise stepped forward, her voice clear, resonant. Bridge Hall Foundation will run weekly. Legal clinics on Thursdays, job fairs the last Saturday of each month, a warm room on cold snap days. She glanced at Nathan, a spark in her eyes. And quarterly, we'll host a repair school. Nathan teaches tenants the mysteries behind the panels. Nathan raised an eyebrow, a grin tugging at his lips. You volunteered me. I recognized your calling, she said, unapologetic, her smile a challenge he met with a nod. I'll teach, he said, as long as the first lesson is to listen before you turn a screw. Perfect, she said, her voice warm with agreement. Mr. Ellis struck the bell, its small, resonant note standing beside the promise chime like a friend, not a rival. The crowd clapped, then lingered, not out of duty, but because a room that welcomes begs you to stay. The moment that would live in memory, though no phones were raised, came near the end. Someone requested a photo for the newsletter, and Mr. Ellis, bending the third rule in spirit, arranged it with the care of a man setting a table for a sacred meal. Stand there, he said to Elise by the blueprint. Nathan here, we're the tape puckers. Lila, middle, because the middle holds. They stood, not posed, but placed. Elise with Lila's bouquet, Nathan with a smudge of machine oil near his cuff, defiant of erasure. Lila with ink-stained fingers from the sign she'd lettered. Behind them the words, we fix, we rise, glowed under soft lights that made faces honest. No shutter clicked, no flash demanded a blink, but the room saw three figures in a line that answered a question no one dared voice, a heart's snapshot of home. The promise chime sang again, two notes clear and human, and the doors opened. People moved through, to jobs, buses, cold air that felt less like punishment and more like a pause between rooms. Elise turned to Nathan, her voice close to wonder. We did a thing. We started one, he said, his eyes steady, warm. Lila tugged his sleeve, her eyes bright. Can we come back every Thursday? We live here now, Nathan said, the truth settling deeper than he'd expected. They stepped down from the riser, the sign catching the light again, plain and defiant. We fix, we rise. It wasn't just a sentence anymore. It was a practice, held honest by a room. At dawn, the hoistway opened, the tower's heart beat soft enough to hear a new one begin. The old elevator car had been craned out weeks ago, replaced by something less machine, more decision, satin-brushed steel, a warm oak handrail inviting touch, lighting trimmed to a soft ellipse that softened faces without lying about the hour. Nathan stood in the pit, torque wrench in hand, his patience forged in longer nights. Lower half an inch, he called to the rigger above. The counterweight murmured, the car settling with a delicate sigh. Metal finding home. A city inspector in a wool coat and practical boots watched, her clipboard tucked under her arm like a skeptical bird. You've overbuilt your safety margin, she said, her tone grudgingly approving. Nathan didn't look up, his focus on the work. I've recalibrated where my margin lives, she smirked. Engineers call that religion. I call it a pass, pending your door sensor test. Hitty gave her a half smile, the kind that respected scrutiny. On the landing, Mr. Ellis wiped a non-existent smudge from the call button with a handkerchief older than half the staff. Elise stood beside him, her coat unbuttoned against a morning that felt less like punishment, a brushed brass plaque in her hands, engraved by a South Branch sign maker who charged too little and wept too much when he read the words. We fix, we rise. S and L Cole. Ready? She asked. Nathan climbed from the pit, rolling his shoulder, habit now, not pain, and took the plaque, his thumb grazing its bevel like a name on an old stone. "She'll like her jewelry," he said. The inspector cleared her throat. "Sensor test first, then adornment." "Door!" Nathan called to the tech at the control panel. "Cycle, open, close, slow run." The doors slid apart, their motion smooth as breath. A light curtain traced invisible lines. Nathan held a folded cloth in the gap. The car refused to close, respectful as a gentleman at a threshold. "Again," he said. No stutter, no ghost in the relay. "Run!" The car nudged upward, stopping precisely, as if obeying a vow. The inspector scribbled, her pen dotting the page with an emphatic period. "It's rare," she said, her tone warming, "to see a car that behaves like it knows who's riding." "Doors remember hands," Nathan said. "She'll remember ours." Elise stepped forward, a small driver in hand, her movements carrying the gravity of affixing truth to steel. Nathan centered the plaque beneath the panel, level by instinct, and drove the first screw home. The metal sang, a bell agreeing with its purpose. "Nice letters," the inspector murmured. "Who's El Cole?" "His daughter," Elise said, before pride or sorrow could shift Nathan's expression. "She taught us the second half." The inspector nodded, a tenderness slipping into her bureaucrat's morning. "Sign here," she said, tapping the certification line. She looked at Nathan. "Want the first ride?" Mr. Ellis tipped his cap. "Tradition says the owner goes first." He offered Elise a ceremonial key card, though the car no longer needed it. But this one was built by a man who understands gravity. "I say let gravity choose." "Gravity chooses both," Elise said softly. "We ride together." The inspector pressed the door release. The promise chime sang. 2 notes, clear, the second landing like a foot on a familiar stair. They stepped in, the cabin holding 4 in the space between them. The floor was forgiving rubber, patterned like snow made warm. Above the handrail, a matte bronze panel reflected faces, softened into shapes anyone could claim. Elise ran her fingertips along the oak, murmuring, "Light that keeps its promises." Nathan tapped the panel. "She asked where you want to go." He pointed to the new button, Bridge Hall Foundation, in a font like plain speech, moved higher on the stack, a quiet defiance dressed as ergonomics. "It's a habit worth building." Elise pressed 17. The doors closed with intention, not haste. The car rising steady as breath, its hum a faint willingness. No lurch, no swallowed syllables. The city slid past the seam where doors met frame. Shadow, light, then the landing they'd remade to welcome, not warn. They didn't step out. "Again," Elise said. He sent them to the lobby and back, a liturgy of trust. The inspector rode once, marked her page, and stepped off with brisk satisfaction in a word she'd later share with her sister. Beautiful. On the 4th run, they rode alone, silence writing the first paragraph of a new chapter. "My father took me to the top after hours," Elise said, her eyes on the seam. "He made me promise 2 things. Never use height to feel bigger than those below, and never ride alone when you can ride beside." Nathan looked at the brass plaque, its initials widening his life's corridor. "I thought doors were my vocabulary. Turns out this one's grammar." "We both rewrote sentences," she said, her voice soft with wonder. The car stopped at 17, but they stayed, as if worship needed another minute. "Nathan," she said, his name no longer a surprise but a place in her mouth. "Tell me the truth. No protecting me. Did I make this about atonement?" "You made it about repair," he said, his voice steady. "Atonement counts what we owe. Repair counts who stands when we're done." She nodded, relief loosening a muscle she hadn't known was tight. "Good. I don't want a shrine. I want a hallway that leads out." "We built one," he said simply. From the landing, children's voices negotiated crayons. A woman's laugh rose. Mr. Ellis's gentle bell named "Someone Like a Spelling Lesson." Elise pressed L. They descended halfway down when she drew a breath, letting the room notice. "There's something else," she said, her tone a door opening. "Elliot believes the judge will grant unsupervised visitation. He's never promised that firmly." She didn't touch him, setting the sentence beside him like a cup of water within reach. "And when they ask who you are in Lila's life, I want to say something true. In court and out. He's the man who built the elevator that doesn't abandon you. Nathan kept his eyes on the panel, the lobby number lighting, then dimming as the car slowed with a grace too polite to interrupt. Whatever the judge says, he said, careful but resolute, I don't step off the job. That's the oath. The doors parted, the lobby waiting, warmed by winter sun folding into the atrium, a florist's cart selling mercy by the stem. The morning felt like good news, poorly dressed but undeniable. Elise reached into her coat, pulling out a slim cream envelope with a blue border. This is for Lila, she said. Not from my office. From me. He raised an eyebrow. She drew the sign, started the chime. It's wrong to tell a child the system heard her and not say I did, she said, placing the envelope in his palm, careful not to touch, her gesture a gift without debt. Read it first. I will, Nathan Cole said, tucking the cream envelope into his jacket, as if the space over his heart was crafted for deliveries that carried weight. And if you don't want your name to complicate, if complication is the price of thanking a child, Elise Harper interrupted, her voice steady but warm. We're rich. Mr. Ellis approached, holding 2 paper cups with lids that snapped shut like contentment sealed. Rode like a hymn, he announced, his eyes twinkling with the wisdom of old choirs. Fewer false notes than some I've heard. From halfway to the service stairs, the inspector's voice echoed back, a benediction wrapped in bureaucracy. Tag and file, she's yours. Elise turned to Nathan, her mouth tilting with a spark of defiance. One more ride? Where to? He asked, matching her tone. Nowhere, she said, her smile soft but sure. Just up, and not stuck. They stepped back into the elevator, the doors closing with a gentle certainty. The promise chime sang its 2 honest notes, clear as a vow kept. Elise stood closer than policy would advise, yet farther than presumption would demand. Their reflections in the bronze panel equal in the only measure that mattered, steadiness of heart. Do you know the best thing about a well-built elevator? She asked, her voice a quiet melody. It behaves when no one's watching. It teaches you to trust motion, not announcements. The car rose, gliding past floors where fear once held its breath, now humming with a system tuned to kindness. At 17 they stopped, but neither reached for the door. It opened on its own, as if it knew. Elise turned to him, her eyes steady in a way that would have startled her 5 winters ago. I won't look away, she said, her voice a pledge. He met her gaze unflinching. Neither will I. Outside the sign, we fix, we rise, caught the light, practiced in its quiet defiance. Inside the chime's 2 notes faded into a tone felt more than heard, the silence of a room that finally believed its people. They stepped out together, the world offering no applause because none was needed. The elevator did what it was built for, carried weight without complaint, returned, and never trapped those who trusted it. In the courtroom, where Wood remembered every story it had held, Lila's handwriting lay on the bench, small but brave, legible as daylight. Dear Judge, I know my dad doesn't wear a suit or talk fancy, but he's the strongest man I know, and he fixed more than an elevator. He fixed her heart. Snow feathered the courthouse windows, a soft curtain against the world. A radiator clicked, keeping time with nerves held taut. Judge Callahan read the letter again, slower, as if the words demanded reverence. Ms. Navarro, he said, his voice steady, turning to the guardian ad litem. You've reviewed the home conditions and employment stability? Yes, Your Honor, Ms. Navarro replied. Mr. Cole holds 2 jobs, now consolidated for predictable hours. He has consistent housing, a verified support network. His discipline in emergencies is documented. The child is safe with him. The judge's gaze shifted to Nathan. Mr. Cole, anything you'd like to add? Nathan rose, hands at his sides, his voice a quiet oath. Only this, Your Honor. I came in breathing. I'll leave breathing. And in between, I'll stay useful for my daughter. A ripple passed through the room, the kind that recognizes a sentence that won't age. Judge Callahan nodded once, his pen tapping the bench. The court grants unsupervised visitation, weekly, effective immediately, Sundays 10 to 6 with additional time as schedules allow by mutual agreement. We'll review in 3 months, but I expect to find what I see today. Steadiness. He lifted Lila's letter, a faint smile softening his face. And for the record, this letter isn't evidence of anything but heart. That said, courtrooms do better when they remember what heart sounds like. Nathan sat slowly, air returning to his ribs as if a window had been flung open. Elise remained still, but her shoulders eased like winter softening into spring. Lila squeezed Nathan's fingers under the rail, her whisper bright with triumph. Pancakes. Every Sunday, he whispered back, his voice thick with quiet joy. Outside, Chicago exhaled snow, the courthouse steps salted into a careful path. Nathan, Elise, and Lila stood together at the top, watching the city embrace another storm without complaint. Lila tucked her scarf higher, her eyes sparkling with a child's certainty of what came next. Can I run ahead and tell Mr. Ellis? She asked. Nathan nodded. Don't slip. Tell him the judge listened first and decided last. She laughed, her purple hat bobbing like a lantern as she darted down the steps. Silence settled, the good kind, not demanding to be filled. Elise looked at Nathan, memorizing not his face but the steadiness behind it. You did it, she said, her voice soft, awed. We did what was asked, he replied, his words plain but heavy. Then the door opened. Without ceremony, she reached for his hand. No announcement, no pose, just 10 honest fingers meeting 10 honest fingers in the falling snow. They walked forward, no destination more complicated than the next step. The city blurred into soft edges around them. A bakery window fogged with warmth, a bus stop where strangers stood shoulder to shoulder under a shared roof, a florist's cart painting color against the gray. You once told me you schedule feelings, Nathan said, a smile tugging at his mouth. I canceled some meetings, Elise replied, her eyes bright. I kept this one. At Beacon Tower, the lobby glowed with quiet gold, its light a promise kept. Mr. Ellis stood at the door, cap lifted high, as if the building itself had heard the verdict. The building heard, he said, his voice a technical report laced with joy. May I be the first civilian to say, about time? You may, Nathan said, a grin breaking through. Lila burst in, snow dusting her eyelashes, triumph in her breath. He said Sundays and maybe Thursdays. If homework's a good citizen, Nathan said, Thursdays will learn their manners. Elise brushed a flake from Lila's hat, her touch gentle. You kept your promise, she murmured. So did you, Lila replied, as if it were the simpler truth. They moved toward the elevator, the plaque beneath the panel catching a slant of light. We fix, we rise. N&L Cole. Not loud, not shy, exactly where it belonged. Lila pressed the button with ceremonial precision, and the doors parted, oak handrails waiting for hands. The three stepped in, fitting as easily as a sentence that had found its right words. 17? Elise asked. Lobby to 17, Nathan said. Then back again, just to hear how quiet the promise is. The chime sang its two clear notes, the car rising without shudder or hesitation, only the kind of motion the body trusts without thought. Through the seam where the doors met, floors slipped by like pages turning themselves. Lila leaned into Nathan's side, watching the numbers glow and fade. It's like it's breathing, she whispered. It is, Nathan Cole said, his voice a quiet echo of Lila's wonder, his eyes soft as he watched her lean into his side. So are we. At 17, the elevator doors parted, revealing the room they'd crafted, a small, orderly sanctuary of mercy. Legal pamphlets stood stacked in neat rows, chairs angled for conversation, not confrontation. On the notice board, a child's drawing bloomed, an elevator with a smile and a speech bubble whispering, Up, please. They didn't step out. Some moments demand stillness over arrival, a pause to hold the weight of what's been built. Again, Lila said softly, her voice a spark in the quiet. Nathan pressed the button, and the car descended, then rose again, its motion seamless, the gentlest hum rising like a heart remembering its rhythm, refusing the drama of fear. Elise Harper watched the panel numbers glow and fade, her gaze unwavering, her voice forging a sentence that became a place to stand. Whatever the world says, we will not leave each other in the dark. Nathan nodded, his words of vow etched in steel. We leave breathing, and we leave together. The elevator moved, its motion free of fear, a silent promise kept. Outside, snow stitched the day to the evening, each flake a thread in a tapestry of hope. Inside, three souls held a quiet that made the future possible, a stillness that sang of trust. When the doors closed again, no unseen camera was needed to capture the truth. A cabin gliding upward, smooth as breath, without a rattle or complaint, as if the metal itself had learned patience. Through the seam where shadow met light, the city seemed to nod in agreement, mended things when cared for. Don't squeak, they carry. In that moment, the most powerful changes unfolded not in grand speeches or sudden miracles, but in the quiet hands that fixed what was broken, in hearts learning to rise together. This story, woven from courage and care, is a reminder that ordinary people can mend the world's fractures with steady hands and open hearts. Wherever you are, your city, your story, they matter here, in this shared space where hope takes root and healing begins. May you carry this tale forward, a beacon of resilience and love, and may every step you take find an elevator that lifts you higher, never trapping the trust you bring.